Hi everyone, this is Gary Wilson and welcome to this week's live Investor Agent webinar. And again, for those of you who've been through any of the other training programs, welcome aboard. That would be flipping for profits without the risk, rental problems without the pain, turning rental problems into real estate profits. Wholesaling is actively being edited and should be published again first quarter. Anybody that wants to be in on that on the ground floor, just let me know. Of course, is active students, you get access, you get the basic information for free, the books and so forth, and anything we have in the way of attachments, addendums, exhibits, things like that. You get all that. But the actual training program you do have to pay for, unfortunately, but it is half price for existing students. Wholesaling has been a real hot topic lately. It just keeps coming up, so I figured I'll give it a couple of weeks to really go through a little more detail here, so at least you have a high-level view of what's involved with wholesaling, how to do it properly. So if you're on tonight's webinar and you were not on last week's webinar, you definitely want to get that recording and watch it and take notes, because we gave a lot of good information last week. So in any case, welcome aboard also to all the new folks. If you just joined in the last month or so and you haven't been on one of these yet, it is live. It's totally unscripted, unfiltered. And the way we pick the subject is really you tell us what it is you want to talk about, and a lot of times I can judge it and kind of gauge it from the Q&A I get on a regular basis. I have daily one-on-ones with people, what we call strategy sessions, and I also get emails. So based on that type of input, it really dictates what we cover in these weekly webinars. So you have a lot of say-so in what we do, and of course they're every week. And if you can't make them, obviously we send the recording out the very next day. So in any case, also if you have questions, initially use your question box to post the questions, and I believe I've been able to get through all the questions at every webinar. Generally we don't stop until you guys all the questions are exhausted. And sometimes we can unmute you, but for some reason the unmute function hasn't been working. I've got to call on the GoToWebinar. By the way, I did get my new laptop for all those of you who were patiently going through all of the trying to figure things out. I finally bit the bullet and got a really nice, basically solid-state computer. It's doesn't have a physical or mechanical hard drive, so it's a lot more durable, reliable, and a pretty powerful computer. I got a really good deal on that, kind of an interesting story. I'll just tell you briefly. It was a Black Friday sale. I got it pre-Black Friday, the Friday before. It was a Lenovo Yoga 900. Paid for it in advance, went up to pick it up this past Friday. They said, well, we got them in, but we sold them all. And I said, what about the one that I bought? He said, well, we mistakenly sold it. And I said, well, what do we do now? Because I travel. I'm not going to be here anymore past today. And they said, well, this computer says we have one. We just don't know where it is. They found it. Turns out it was the next version up. 500, it was the 16 meg RAM, 500 megahertz processor. And they gave me the original 500 off, and this one was $500 more. I got it and another 500 off of that. So I got a $1,600 computer for like $700 or something all in. So pretty neat. Pays to be nice and be patient, because the whole while I just smiled and said, well, let's try to find a solution. Let's see where you do have them around the country. Let's order it, and I'll have it shipped to my hotel, whatever week hotel will be up the following week. And lo and behold, the deal got even better. So, in any case, let me check for questions here real quick, guys, before we get into more content. Let's see. Rhonda says, it's actually called Inland Empire Real Estate Investors Club. Okay, excellent. So if you want to need that this month, because REIA groups generally want to know well in advance what's on their schedule. So if you could, you probably just had your last meeting, actually last week or the week before. But if you could make contact with someone in the club and then do an introduction for me, I'll take it from there. But hopefully we can get that arranged for you for that fourth Wednesday in February, which I believe was the 22nd. Is that right? Yes, 22nd. And that would be wonderful. So appreciate you doing that. Okay, guys, back to the subject at hand here. What we did last week is we talked about wholesaling. Really, as much as we couldn't get through everything, but basically what I did last week is I went through this diagram here, okay, and explained exactly what wholesaling is, how you execute it from the investor perspective and from the agent perspective, and if you're both, what does that mean? And how do you accomplish it legally, ethically, and of course profitably, all right? So we went through that last week. Tonight what I wanted to do is go over 3 things initially. I've got some other things we can cover if we have time related to the subject, but initially tonight I want to talk about what is a net listing. For some of you it will apply, for some of you it will not apply, because some states and provinces allow it, some states and provinces don't allow it. Okay, the next thing is an LLC. We're going to talk about the basics of setting up an LLC, and I'll give you a little bit of a insider's hint as far as who to call for that. She's actually one of our students and an attorney, and she owns 2 REIA groups. And she's agreed to have you guys be able to call her. In fact, we interviewed her back several months ago. Teresa Martin is her name. She's on the community site. You'll have her contact information there. And if you want a brief consultation, she will help you go through some Q&A and then help you get started. She can't practice in every single state, but nothing like having an advocate on your side like that to give you the questions to ask and the things to think about. And she's one of us, which is even better. So in any case, the third thing is actually selling the contract. Once you get something, a place under contract, a property under contract, how do you actually sell the contract? All right, what are the things you need to know about and think about when you go about doing that? Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into it. First things first, let's jump to another section here. Let me reduce my panel. So for a moment, I'm not going to be able to see your questions, but it allows me to see the full screen, of course, you guys too. First things first, I've been instructed to inform you that I'm not an attorney. As many of you know, I'm not an attorney. And, you know, I always suggest no matter what you do, if you're doing something that you're not 100% knowledgeable about or comfortable with, or even you're not even sure, that's when you pick up the phone and call, you know, a competent attorney. And I suggest you call Teresa Martin because she's one of us. And even if you only get 10 minutes, man, it can really save you a world of trouble and money. And she can help you. Matter of fact, we have attorneys and REIA groups all over the country. So if you're wanting to get with investors more in a personal way, join your local REIA group, and you'll have access to attorneys there. Every single REIA group has attorneys. Okay. So in any case, first things first, you definitely need to be aware of the rules and regulations in your particular state or province, depending on where you are. You know, what I'm going to do right now is talk about the subject of wholesaling relative to the sales end of the business, not necessarily the legal end of the business, although we are going to get into it. You know, I'm simply going to paint the picture for you and set you off so that you'll know what questions to ask and know what steps to take to move forward. But first things first, in some states you're allowed to do what's called a net listing. Okay, net listing is a variation of a wholesale transaction. And again, for those of you just briefly, if you weren't on last week and not sure what wholesaling is, you're simply selling the contract. You're not selling the property. You're selling the contract for the property. So in other words, you get the property under contract. Let's just switch back here briefly. Okay, here's property A and party A. Party B is a individual, could be an agent, could not be, could just be a simple investor who gets the property A under contract. So this person, for all intents and purposes, like, she gets this property. But the reality is she's not going to buy it. She's going to take this contract in her hand that says she's going to buy this property and assign the contract to this fellow over here. And he's going to pay her a fee for that, called an assignment fee, and he in turn will buy the property. Okay, so that's called wholesaling. She's wholesaling or assigning the right to purchase the property to another individual. And we went over all that last week, so if you want to get some details, please look at last week's webinar. Now, that's basic wholesaling. Let's say in your state, you're allowed to do what's called a net listing. Okay, net listing is this. let's say this person B now, and I'm going to, so scratch this, wipe the slate clean. These people now play a different role here. Okay, this person is an agent, okay, and she wants to wholesale the property in a state where they allow net listings, a net listing. So what happens here now, as the agent, she approaches the owner of property A, okay, this person says, hey, I just need to get $100,000 for this property. That's all. I need $100,000 and I can walk away. All right, I've got some things I got to take care of. I need $100,000. The agent, this person B here, okay, now remember, put aside what we learned last week. This person B is playing a different role tonight. This person B now is an agent. Agent B, let's just say her name actually is B for Beatrice. She believes not only can she sell the property, but she believes she can sell it for a lot more than $100,000. She believes she can maybe sell it for $125,000. Okay, so what she says to the owner of property A is this: I know I can sell your property. I believe I can sell it for more than $100,000. I'm willing to take a chance here. What I'm willing to do is get the property under contract to list and sell for $100,000. However, I'm going to market the property for $125,000. Okay, so in the compensation section, she has a reference to an attachment or exhibit or addendum, whatever you want to call it, that she attaches to the listing agreement, and that attachment, it specifies that her commission is going to be the equivalent of any net profits over $100,000. So in other words, if she sells the property for 100, if she lists it for 125, let's say she sells it for 115, 15,000 is going to be her commission. Okay, the owner gets his 100,000. That's what he wanted. She sold it for more than 100,000. She gets anything over and above 100,000. In this case, 15,000. Now let's say she only sells it for $100,001. In that case, her commission would be $1. So there is risk there, all right? Or let's say the property gets sold, but it sells for less than $100,000. She doesn't have to make up the difference, but the reality is she makes no commission. So there is risk there. So the benefit to the seller is he's almost assured of getting what he wants. If he doesn't get what he wants, he doesn't have to pay commission. That's kind of a selling feature, if you will, or a pitch. All right. So in any case, the net listing allows this agent to essentially wholesale the property. She's really not wholesaling. She is going to sell the property, right? She's not selling the contract in this case. She's selling the property. But her commission would be equal to an amount she may have obtained had she wholesaled the property. So you see what I'm saying, guys? A couple things to think about here. You might wonder, why would somebody do that? Well, in the case of the owner A, they might be in a situation where they need to sell ASAP, and quite frankly, they're frazzled, and their desire, their need to sell is greater than their need to get the most money they can. Okay, you follow that? Their need to sell, period, is greater than the need to sell for the most money they can get. So it's kind of ironic, but believe it or not, it does happen. It happens quite frequently, in fact, in certain states. Now, some of the benefits are this. When you're wholesaling, depending on how you structure things, if you're back to the original wholesale model we gave last week, that transaction, in a lot of cases, if you're not using an agent, falls outside the laws of many of the laws of real estate brokerage. In other words, there's no E&O insurance. So if you property sold, neither party has any recourse, any coverage at all in the way of E&O insurance. Okay, that's why we like the method that we teach, which is what I went over last week, to encourage you to work with wholesalers from a licensee's point of view, because not only are you covered because you're a licensee and you're covered with your E&O, but so are the parties in a transaction. Okay, you follow that? So a net listing, you're basically wholesaling completely within the framework of real estate brokerage. All right, so all the usual rules and laws apply. All the protections are there. It's basically a neutral system between buyer and seller. So that's a real big benefit of why someone would wholesale. Now let's go to the agent. Why would an agent want to do a wholesale? Well, maybe B's pretty good. Maybe she's been around the block a few times. She knows the values. She knows the market. She knows what's moving right now, what's hot, what's cold. Um, she knows this property in her mind should sell for more than this guy wants for it. She's willing to take her chances to increase her commission by putting her neck on the line, okay? By saying my commission is equal to anything over and above $100,000. So in other words, she's willing to take that risk. If she comes, if some days you get the bear, some days the bear gets you. She may get $10, $15, $20,000 commission, but she may also get nothing. Okay, so there is certain risk there, but a person who does this, an agent who does this, is typically someone who understands the business, understands the marketplace, understands the clientele, and what's happening right now in supply and demand. Okay, now what's odd is you might think, well, why would this guy do that? Why wouldn't he just say sell it for 125 and I'll pay my 6%? Well, again, the pitch is, hey, this is the agent. I'll sell it to you for $100,000. I'll sell it for you for $100,000. If I don't, if it sells for less, you pay no commission. Okay. If it sells for $1 over $100,000, I only get $1. The bottom line is my commission is tied to anything over and above $100,000. So there are people who do this. In fact, there's a lot of them. In any case, this person here is, glad to get a property at a fair price. So she can sell this for 125, and the market determines that property should sell for 125. This guy's not overpaying. Okay, he's getting a property for fair market value. This guy's getting what he wants. He gets his 100,000. He walks away, lock, stock, and barrel. And B gets a bigger, fatter commission. Okay. So I just wanted to go over net listing briefly with you. I'll go back to the text here, and you have to check with your broker. And sometimes you have to. Here's what I would recommend. Okay. Check with your broker. If you're really uncertain, call your state's local real estate board. All of you are members of a local association typically. You can start by calling your association, your realtors association, and they'll help you find the answer. In other words, does your state allow you to do net listings? And you can also go to your state's association of realtors or the state board of realtors. There's a number of places you can go to, and it's not a very uncommon question. Oftentimes they'll know right off the top of their heads, but more importantly, they can direct you to the right literature, the right locations online to do your research. Okay, I've done net listings. They absolutely do work. I like them because there's more protection there within the framework of real estate brokerage. I like that. Okay, if your state doesn't allow it, then you're back to what we talked about last week. I just want to let you guys know that in some states and provinces, you've got another opportunity here, a way out, to do this. So, in any case, I just described here in this content, and this is in the book, Wholesaling So Everybody Wins. I'm not sure if Beverly sent it out, but you all have access to it online, regardless. If you're a brand new student, you probably are going to be getting loaded to the membership section this week. You already have access to the training material, but this is another section of the website that gives you access to all the previously recorded webinars, all the interviews we've done. It's all out there. The written material, the books, I think, are in a different section of the website. You don't have to wait for that. You can go anytime. But the example in this book just gives you the example of property that was sold for $100,000, and the agent sold it for $120,000, and therefore their commission was $20,000. That's the example there. Okay. In any case, the next thing I want to touch on, guys, is LLCs. Just setting up a basic, simple LLC. In Canada, we call it something different, but it's essentially about the same. There's Canadian contract law is actually simpler than U.S. contract law. There's not as many variables, not as many variations, so it's more expensive. In Canada, I think to set up a basic corporation partnership kind of thing, the government charges you $800, okay? In the States, you can often get a LLC set up for about 125 bucks. Matter of fact, we'll look at an example here in a little bit. So before we go forward, let me check for questions. Based on what I just showed you guys for net listings, please let me know if there's anything you're unclear about, any fogginess, because now's the time to ask. Okay, let me see. I'm almost through here. I think we're okay on questions. Let me go back the other direction just to make sure. Okay, I think we're all set. Okay, LLCs. All right, LLC, I'm going to reduce my panel again so I won't be able to see your questions here for a few moments, all right? LLC is an acronym that stands for Limited Liability Corporation or Limited Liability Company, okay? The basic types of entities when it comes to setting up business structures are C corporations. A C corporation is what you might find typically with something like Coca-Cola, General Electric, Westinghouse, you know, big corporations are almost always C corps, okay? Another type of a corporation is an S corp, okay? S corp is typically much smaller in size. In other words, the underlying business that's operating under an S corp guidelines is typically much smaller than a C corp. A lot of times these companies are owned mainly by individuals, although they can sell shares of the S corporation. Whereas C corps are typically not family owned. They're typically owned by shareholders. Now, it doesn't mean all of them, and there's certainly a lot of C corps out there. They're what we call closely held corporations. Even though they have shares, you can look at the annual report and see who really owns the business. Okay, C corps are generally S corps are usually the ones you might find around town. A lot of times they're small manufacturers, mom and pop type organizations. I've seen a lot of restaurants use S corps. Print shops can usually be set up as S corps. There's a lot of examples of S corps. I've even seen property management companies set up as S corps. I've even seen people who are real estate investors owning real estate inside S corps. I had one guy argue with me incessantly about it over a period of months and years, and he was the only guy. This was a local. It was a real estate association that I belonged to for property managers, right? And this guy was an owner, and he became a member of the board of the property management association in the area. Even though he didn't manage for other people, he just managed his own. But he had thousands of units. Okay, the guy was a big operator. He insisted that S corp was the way to go when you own real estate, and yet every accountant, every attorney, everybody was saying no. If you're owning real estate for rental purposes, particularly, you should be owning them inside an LLC. And that's what I've always done. I've used LLCs. The benefit of an LLC is it gives you the liability protection of a corporation. Okay, in other words, it separates you by one layer from direct ownership of an LLC. Okay. The other thing too is it gives you a lot of flexibility in how you file your taxes, and when you file, what your fiscal year is. But essentially, an LLC you can elect. There's certain elections you make, and those elections are such that you can make it look like a C corp. You can make it look like a partnership. You can make it look like a sole proprietorship, which is you owning it, and you're the only one that owns everything. All right. LLC look to the government and the IRS, and you do have the ability to make change at certain time frames. It's just a great entity. Started back a generation ago, maybe 25, 30 years ago, and in the 90s was going through his what we call the testing period as far as case law goes. But now there's a solid body of case law going over a good solid generation, say 5 years. So LLCs are also very easy to set up and very inexpensive to set up and very inexpensive to maintain and report on going forward. So as you might imagine, I'm a big fan of LLCs, if I hadn't made that clear. Now, having said that, early on in my investing business, at one point I had as many as 20 properties in my own name. They were not even an LLC. I don't recommend doing that, although there may be times when you do it and everything's okay. I never had a problem with it, actually. And by the way, a quick misnomer here. An LLC, Dan Levy's one of our, just popped up on my screen here, he's one of our students. LLC is not meant to be used for the purpose of keeping you out of trouble, okay? If you're looking at an LLC to keep you out of trouble, you've probably got the wrong frame of mind. So here's the way I'll describe this to you. This is what how liability should be viewed, okay? If you own your own properties, and you should be taking notes here because this is what you want to tell your investors, okay? When you own properties, rental properties, your first line of defense is you being a good owner, maintaining the property in a safe, clean, reliable condition that's up to code, and everything operates and functions correctly and safely, all right? So that first line of defense is you being a good owner, you or your client, all right? If you're not an owner yourself, but your clients are. Second line of defense is you still have property insurance on all your properties. In fact, if you have loans on your properties, you have to have property insurance. You won't get a loan from anybody without property insurance on your property. So let's say somebody does a proverbial slipping on a bar of soap and falls down and wrenches their back, okay? And they decide to sue. The first thing they're going to do is your insurance is going to get involved. Matter of fact, if you don't know this already, whenever you find somebody making a claim against you, whether you believe it's right or wrong, always call your insurance company first. Homeowners, auto insurance, typically are the same company. And they'll tell you if you have something might be covered under your homeowner's insurance, for example, okay? So in any case, second line of defense is your property insurance. And in most cases, like 99.9% of the time, they will satisfy the claim. I've had a couple of claims over the years, never had a problem. First one was somebody actually slipped outside the house, grabbed a handrail we literally just put in, pulled it out of the wall, and sprained her ankle. And she filed a claim at the hospital, from her hospital bills, and my insurance company covered it. And all I had to do was sign one paper and say yes over the phone. That was it. Okay, another one I had was a large house fire. It was a big deal. But it was not a big deal for me because I had insurance. And they did the investigation. They found out I was not liable. It was the tenant that was the one that screwed up. I've had other situations too, but again, I never had a problem. I never had anybody get past the insurance because I was always a good owner, okay? Now that's the second line of defense. Third line of defense is you got it, your LLC. So let's say a child dies in one of your units, or your elderly person passes away in one of the units, okay? And the family decides to sue. And they're going to sue for millions of dollars, and your insurance only goes up to $1 million. Well, the next thing they'll do is they're going to go to the ownership of the property, in this case, the LLC. Well, the LLC is only going to have the properties in the LLC, owned by the LLC. In other words, your LLC is not going to own your personal home. Your LLC is not going to own your personal car or any of that kind of stuff, right? So if they do get through to the LLC, you might find your property that's held in the LLC and any other properties held in the LLC by the LLC to be subject to claim. Okay, that's why I never had more than $1 million in any one LLC. Once I got to $1 million in an LLC, I just set up another one. And I never had anybody get to the LLC, but some of you are probably wondering now, hey Gary, we've heard the term piercing the corporate veil. What that means is they get to the LLC level in a lawsuit and they try to go beyond or go through that protective veil the LLC affords you. In other words, the liability protection the LLC gives you, they try to penetrate that and get to you personally. Because let's say maybe you're a millionaire and you own other properties and vacation homes and boats and things like that. They could attach those in a lawsuit if they pierce the corporate veil. But when you have an LLC, as long as you do things correctly, and you should study. Matter of fact, there's a book called Ink and Grow Rich, INC. Ink and Grow Rich, like the book Think and Grow Rich, which you should all read. Ink and Grow Rich describes all this to you. But essentially, you're going to have separate operating account, checking account. Everything is going to be signed in the name of the LLC, so you never would sign, Gary Wilson. You would sign Gary Wilson, member LLC on everything, every check, every contract, everything. And when you do that way, and you don't commingle funds, all the money going through that account that's owned by the LLC is solely for the purpose of the properties, then it's going to be very difficult for someone that pierces the corporate veil. Okay, I mean, there's other things you can do too that are way beyond the scope of tonight's discussion, like set up trusts and blanket holding corporations that actually own all the LLCs. I've never had to go all that way with that. I do have a trust, but it's used for different purposes. In any case, back to the LLC. If you have never set up an LLC before, you should hire an attorney to do it the first time. All right. Now, once you've done it the first time and you set up other LLCs that are exact clones of the first one, yes, you can do it yourself. Again, I'm not trying to tell you what you should do. I'm just telling you what's possible. Okay, in every state and province I've looked in, you don't have to have an attorney set up an LLC. Excuse me, in Canada, you do need to have a legal representation, and it's not called an LLC, by the way. But in any case, in most cases, you can do it yourself. I think you should use an attorney the first time. All right. Now you're going to get a corporation, you're going to get an LLC, you're going to get a separate tax ID. Okay. Again, to the government, this LLC is actually like another person. It's another entity, just like you are. All right. It's taxed separately. By the way, the good thing about an LLC is the income and expenses in that are what we could call pass-through. So those income and expenses pass through the LLC to you on your tax returns. So your tax returns are actually quite simple compared to C Corps and every other kind of corporation, all right? So in any case, you'll have to file typically in any state separate state filings for the LLCs, but for the federal government, if the LLC simply owns properties, you would identify your properties in Schedule E, and in parentheses, your tax accountant would generally refer to the LLC that owns the property. But the Schedule E goes onto your personal tax return, right? So in the case of wholesaling, let's go back to wholesaling now. Okay, we talked about LLCs. By the way, for those of you who are curious, you can go ahead and split your screen right now and Google whatever state you're in, California, Florida, what have you, Georgia, Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri, all these places I've been recently. Google State Bureau of Incorporation or State Incorporation Bureaus. So they're all could be named differently, but basically you're looking for the state website that represents the entity, typically some type of Secretary of State that deals with people setting up companies. And in Pennsylvania, you go to Pennsylvania Open for PA, Open for Business, all right? And on there you can get what's called a PA 100, and you fill out the PA 100, and that's essentially you setting up an LLC. And then you will call the IRS and get your actual individual tax ID. It doesn't cost anything, by the way. So to file a PA 100 costs $125. To get a tax ID from the federal government costs nothing. So for $5, you essentially can be in business. Now you have to have other things like operating agreements, and you got to have annual meeting minutes, things like that. You can even pay companies to do that for you. All that, you have to have all that done so that your corporate veil can't be pierced in a lawsuit, right? If you don't do annual meetings and have annual meeting minutes, that's one of the things good attorneys look for. Anyways, back to this. Let's say you got your LLC, all right? What I want to do is let's go, let me flip back to my chart here. This is going to make things a little bit easier. So in this case, back to the original blueprint for wholesaling. Party A owns the property, property A. Party B is a wholesaler. We're going back to the original model. Party B is a wholesaler. Party C is the consumer who's going to buy the contract from Party B, okay, in this case. Now, what's happening here is this person is now going to be an LLC. So instead of Beatrice or B getting property A under contract, Beatrice is going to use her LLC to do that. So it's Beatrice, LLC is going to get the property under contract from Party A. Now let me do a real quick pause here and check for questions. I apologize, I should have done that before I started this next segment. I want to see if anybody has any questions at all, any help on LLCs. We can Google right now, live online. We can Google any states and corporation bureau to help you all get started. So if anybody wants to do that, please let me know. We can do that live online to help you get started. It'll show you really how easy and simple this process is. So go ahead and do that. I will give you a second to type in questions while I'm waiting here. Okay, let's see. Okay, some of you are saying you actually have LLCs. Well, that's excellent. I'm proud of you and glad that you're doing that. Okay, it's funny because the ones who already have LLCs are the ones who are chiming in. And if you don't have an LLC and you're not sure about it, you can always call me, email me, text me. If you need help getting started, we'll help you get started. Just remember, Teresa Martin is one of our team members, and she did say if you listen to her interview, it's out there on the member section. She gives you her contact information, and it's also on our community site. So once you've been in at the end of every month, we load up all students we've added in the prior month onto the community site. So, in this case, the B is going to be the LLC. Okay, so it's not going to be Beatrice getting this under contract. Beatrice, LLC is getting under contract, and then Beatrice LLC, all right, sells the contract to this gentleman, Party C for Charles. Okay, so in other words, what's happening is B has separated herself from the transaction by one layer. The LLC is the workhorse here and not Beatrice. So if there's a lawsuit, the LLC will be the one named in the lawsuit. Okay, and even if they do name Beatrice in a lawsuit, her attorney is going to be good enough that he can have that thrown out. In other words, he's going to remove her from the case because the LLC is legitimate, all the paperwork was filed correctly, they do annual meetings, they haven't commingled funds, all those things have been done properly. So, all right, let's go back here to where I was. All right, I just want to make sure you're aware of one more thing when it comes to wholesaling. If you're wholesaling in your own name, where your clients are, so please remember to write this down, guys, so you can tell your clients. In every state we've been in, as soon as you wholesale more than 5 contracts in any calendar year, that state could deem you to be a dealer. They call it giving you dealer status. Okay, and when you have dealer status, what that means is you have to file as a corporation your taxes. You got to file a C corp, or basically Schedule C. Excuse me. If you don't set yourself up initially, proactively in advance, or you dictate and control and determine what your entity is going to look like, if you don't do that, and the authorities determine you've sold 5 contracts this year, and you haven't done that, they could, by default, they're going to look at you as a C corp, which is typically the highly taxed version of corporations. There's a lot more to that. There's books on that subject. The book I gave you, Inc. and Grow Rich, covers all that. Now, they're big proponents of C corps, but I will tell you, you've got to really know what the heck you're doing, because if you don't take advantage of all the tax laws, you're going to find yourself paying way too much in taxes by using a C corp. Most people fall in that trap. They think they're going to do everything they can to maximize the benefits of a C corp, and what happens is they don't maximize the benefits. They still pay the taxes on the income of the corporation and the income to the owners of the corporation, because their dividends get taxed as personal income after they've already been taxed as corporate income. So if you're not taking advantage of all these other benefits in a corporation, all you're doing is paying all these extra taxes. You're just throwing your money down the toilet. Just remember that 5 deals, you could be determined to be a dealer. In fact, I wouldn't even take the risk. You might get away with it, you might not, but why take the risk? I mean, for a mere few $100s, it is well worth it to set up an LLC. Okay. Also remember, whenever you use an LLC, you always sign it with your name, okay, and this, a comma, the word member, and you can put in the name of your LLC. So in this case, Beatrice Jones, comma, member, Beatrice LLC. All right. You can't just say member LLC, assuming that the LLC is mentioned somewhere on that page of a contract. That's okay here. All right, here's the example: John Smith, member ABC LLC. Do that on every single thing you sign relative to that corporation, or to that LLC, excuse me. Every check, every contract, every single thing you do. Matter of fact, I would even do it for every piece of correspondence. You know, you don't want to send communications out, written communications, and sign it in your personal name. Always sign it your name, comma, LLC. The name of your LLC and the word LLC. Okay. All right. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of tax benefits tonight because that's a different subject. Just know that the LLC, it's basically a pass-through entity. So income expenses on those forms pass through to you personally on your tax return. You still get the benefits of being a corporation, but you don't have to pay corporate type taxes. You pay personal taxes, right? It does give you the liability of a corporation. So just remember that basic concept there. So I'll give you an example why that's so important since we're on the subject. In the case of rental income, see, rental income is called, according to the IRS, passive income. What that means is it's income that comes in whether or not you do anything or not. You know, technically the way they wrote up the tax code, it looks like you should be completely hands-off. You're not doing anything. That money just rolls in on its own. We know that's not true, but they still call it passive income. So what that means is passive income, you don't pay Social Security tax on that. Passive income, you only pay income tax. You follow what I'm saying? So rental income, passive income, is the least taxed form of income at a personal level. Remember that. Passive income, you only pay income tax, not Social Security tax. So in the case of an LLC, that passive income is passing through to you, through the LLC, through to you on your personal tax return. So you get the benefits of having passive income, and you get the benefits of liability protection by having that property owned in an LLC. Now, if that doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. So just remember that. Again, it's all in the information. You can get it for free on the website. Okay. Other thing, of course, and I'll just touch on this since we're going through it. Obviously, you can determine when your fiscal year is, so you can determine when you pay taxes. Okay. In any case, let's move on here. I'm not going to go into that because we've covered that in another section. Let's go to, let's see here, page 129. Okay. Let's talk about selling the contract. Hopefully we can get through this, at least this portion, which is the last thing I wanted to talk about. Again, if I have a few minutes, I might touch on 1 or 2 more things. Before we get into selling the contract, let me bring my panel back over and look for questions. And boy, you guys are quiet tonight. Maybe everybody's still from Thanksgiving. By the way, I hope you all had a happy Thanksgiving. Actually, Thanksgiving one back in October because of course, I'm a quasi Canadian, so I had a Canadian Thanksgiving in October. I had American Thanksgiving on Thursday around 1 o'clock in the afternoon with my dad in Washington, D.C., and about 6 o'clock at night, actually more like 8 o'clock at night with my mom in Charlottesville, Virginia. So I had 3 Thanksgivings. And if I turn to the side and you look at my profile shot, you can say, yep, looks like you had 3 Thanksgiving dinner, Gary. But okay, so hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. I don't see any questions here. I'm going to pull my panel back and get into selling the contract. Very, very important here, guys. Let's say you get your, okay, let's go back here. Let's say you're now B, you're Beatrice, all right? Whether you're an individual doing this on your own, you're an agent, you're in an LLC, you're not an LLC, regardless. You've got this place under contract. Now you've got to sell this contract in your hand here to this gentleman here, Mr. C, Mr. Charlie, all right? Now, you got to do it in such a way that he's going to actually like what he sees. He's going to want to buy the property that's represented in the contract. In other words, remember, you're selling the contract. In his mind, he's got his eyes all the way over here, right? So you got to present this in a very positive fashion, all right? And that's what we're going to talk about next. So let me go back here, okay? I'll give you one quick little, it was a famous saying from one of my favorite people, and unfortunately, he's run into a little bit of trouble here in the last couple of years. He had this saying. He said, if you give me a steak dinner on a trash can lid, I'm not going to like it. It's going to look horrible. I'm going to think it's horrible. I'm not going to want to eat it or even touch it or take a look at it. However, if you give me that same steak dinner served on fine china, fine silverware, or crystalware, cloth napkins, and a nice table, okay, with a nice padded chair, I'm going to love that meal. Matter of fact, I'm probably going to think that's one of the best meals I've ever had. What I'm getting at here is you need to think in those terms when you're selling a contract. If you just have a written up contract and you send that electronically to a prospective purchaser, they may look at it and think, well, I don't know if I want this or not. You know, so you got to package this thing up is what I'm getting here. You got to package this thing up, present it in a neat, clean, orderly way that basically sells the sizzle, not the steak. Okay, so assuming at this point you've got your database of buyers, you've filled the order, so you know you got at least one person who wants to buy a property, the same kind of property that you have under contract. All right. In order for you to profit, you've got to sell the property, you got to sell the contract, so if the buyer feels like he's going to go do a good deal, the seller feels like he's going to go deal, and you're able to make a tidy profit in the form of a wholesale deal. All right. So if you hadn't guessed, it was Bill Cosby that had that famous saying. I'm not advocating Bill Cosby right now because of what he's in trouble for. I don't know what the situation is, guys. I don't watch television. I've lost track of it, quite honestly, with you. I'm not, you know, when I wrote this was before he was in trouble, obviously. So, in any case, that's the example of how when you present something to me, it better look nice and pretty, or I'm probably not going to like it. So when you're presenting a contract to a buyer, all right, let's say it's this $100,000 property and you're trying to get $125,000 for it, all right, it may well be worth it. But if you can't convey that message to your prospective buyer or buyers successfully, it's just not going to matter. It doesn't matter if it's worth it or not. If you've got to create the impression in their mind that it's worth it. So here's how you do it. You should create a package, okay, just almost like the booklet that we create is one of our marketing campaigns. Remember the booklet we put together? You should be putting together a booklet that basically builds a case around the sales agreement. So in the booklet, you're not only going to have the high-level details of the contract, not the whole sales agreement, just the basic bullet items, what rights you have elected, what rights they're going to inherit or they're going to get it assigned to them, just the basics, okay? Obviously, you want to have a price in there, the price that you want to have the buyer pay, okay, which includes the price of the property and the wholesale fee, all right? You want to have pictures of the property. I suggest an entire portfolio of pictures, inside, outside, all the basic systems. What you want to do, though, by the way, guys, is this. Think about a person driving down the street and driving up to the property that is looking to be sold. You want to put your photos in the same order that someone would see when they're going to a property live. So the first picture is the property of the house from the street view, curb view is what we call it. Okay, then you can give one shot in each direction down the street. That's 3 pictures right there. Okay, then you want a couple close-ups of different exterior angles showing the yard, the landscaping, the roofing, the windows, the siding, the front porch, the back deck, all that. Okay, then you go on the inside. The first thing you show, by the way, this is where a lot of people miss, and please write this down because this is important. When you open up the door, the front door, take a picture of the view looking through the front door into the house. Okay, remember, this person's not there initially. They're looking at photos. So if you just go jump from the outside up to the kitchen, they're going to wonder in their mind there's going to be what's called a gap. Okay, sequence gap. Well, what does the front foyer look like? How did I get to the kitchen? So you need to take pictures almost as if you're a person walking through the house. And actually, you should do it that way. Walk through the house and take pictures as you go through, starting on the outside, transitioning to the inside. So you can take the picture looking through the front door. Typically, you're going to turn either right, left, or go straight ahead. Whichever is your intuition takes you, that's the route you go. Could be taking a right and going into the living room. Then you go back into the dining room, take pictures there. Then you go into the kitchen, take pictures there. Then you go down the hallway, take a picture of the hallway so they get the visual of them walking down the hallway. Go into the hall bathroom first, then the other bedrooms, hall bedrooms, and then go to the master suite. Take the master suite and the master bathroom picture, okay? And if there's a downstairs, obviously, then you go downstairs. If there's an upstairs, you go upstairs. But take the pictures in the order that someone would see in a way that makes sense or resonates with them actually walking through the property. Okay, very, very important. Next thing is a written description. You definitely want to give a thorough description of the current condition of the property, what has to be done to the property, should there be any deferred maintenance, what do they have to do with the property if they're going to flip it, for example. And these are recommendations by you, not necessarily, you're not dictating what this person will do with the property. You're just suggesting that for $15,000, they could get the place painted, recarpeted, put in new countertops and door and drawer fronts, and new flooring. Okay, and then they would have a $200,000 property for a total of $140. Remember, they're paying $125 for the property. Put 15 into it, they got it for $140, and essentially it should be worth $200 when they're done. I'm just giving you an example. But give them a description of the property, what repairs or remodeling you suggest be done to the property. Okay. And if you have an inspection report, attach the inspection report to the property. In fact, you should attach any other information you have, any disclosures, like if the seller gave you a lead paint disclosure, radon disclosure, mold disclosure, attach all those in there. If you have a history of rentals, provide the 3 years rental history on the property. Any information pertinent to the property you want to include in this package that you're giving to your wholesaler, right? So put all those things in there, and then you want to build a booklet out of this. Now, what you can do is send the booklet out in the mail to your key clients, the key people, and also you can put it out online. You can put it on Facebook in a link. You can put it on LinkedIn with a link. You can put it on Twitter with a link. You can also, and you should obviously, put it on your website. Okay. And there's a whole section on marketing wholesale deals. When the training program, you'll see there's an entire module just on marketing for wholesaling, right? Marketing wholesale deals. But in any case, for you, you're trying to build a solid case on why someone would buy this property, essentially buy the contract from you. And the more information you provide, the more pictures you provide, the clearer the description you provide, the more chances are you're going to get some offers on your property, right? In any case, I just want to give you a high-level view that just because you get something under contract doesn't mean you're going to be able to sell it. And you can't just send people emails saying, hey, I got this great property, here's a picture of it, and here's what's you're not getting acres, right? You got to really communicate thoroughly, accurately, and completely as you possibly can. So, in any case, guys, that's what I had tonight for wholesaling. We'll talk about lease options another time and what happens. There's other things that happen. Can happen. Let's say you don't sell the contract. What do you do now? We'll cover that. Matter of fact, let's do that next week. Next week's webinar, by the way, is going to be, what night is that? Tuesday the 6th, okay? So we will finish up wholesaling next week, and then the following week we got a special guest on the December the 14th. We've got a financial planner from the Vegas area, and he's got a really neat program for realtors and real estate investors. He's going to give you a bunch of stuff for free, as well as his contact information, because one of the things he's going to give you is something that you can use to give to your clients, okay? Your real estate clients. It could be owner occupants, it could be investors. So you definitely want to be on that webinar, which is the 14th. Next week we'll wrap up wholesaling. We'll talk about what do you do if you can't actually sell the contract. We'll give you some options there. So in any case, for tonight, guys, let me bring my panel back over and make sure I'm all caught up on questions. It looks like I am. Again, I hope you all had a happy and blessed Thanksgiving with you and your families. I thank you for being on tonight. I know a lot of you are just getting back in the swing of things again. We got 4 weeks to go before Christmas. I am taking off the entire week of Christmas. No webinar that week, but we do have webinars this week and, of course, the next 3 weeks. So in any case, let me know if there's any other subjects you want to talk about. By the way, after the 14th, the next one is going to be on Tuesday the 20th. So if you have any subject you want to discuss, then let me know. Now, when we come back from the holidays, we're going to kind of start back at the beginning, start going through the material from the very beginning. That'll take us all the way through summertime. So we did that last year, and people seem to really like that. All of those webinars, by the way, are being transcribed. I was going to tell you that for Christmas bonus. I just slipped and gave you a Christmas present. So in any case, early Christmas present. All the webinars we did in 2016, the first half of the year, not all of them, but most of them, we're having transcribed. So what that means is all the marketing campaigns are not only going to have the audio-visual explanation of them with examples, but you're going to have the written version of that to go with it for free. All those, I mean, I think there's probably 20 to 30 of them. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be sometime, I don't know when Transcriber is going to have that, probably in January, but I wanted to announce that to you for Christmas to give you something to look forward to. So it's a great way to build your book of information. You should have a pretty big manual going on by now. For those of you who've been in for the last year, your manual should be pretty thick. So in any case, you guys have a wonderful week and a great weekend coming up here. I will be in Alabama next week. By the way, I'm in St. Pete this week for my own training, Alabama next week, and back in Atlanta the 2 weeks prior to Christmas. So in Atlanta, for those of you from Atlanta, keep an eye on the air out. Lev Mills and I are working on setting up the Atlanta region, Southeast region mastermind. A lot of you are ready for that. So it looks like the 20, let me go back here. Well, I'm not sure when that's going to be now. It might be the 20th. But in any case, what we're looking for is we're going to set up a mastermind for you guys. And anybody in the Atlanta area, in Georgia essentially, is going to be invited initially. And from there, we'll get it down to the core group for that mastermind. And we're going to assign a group leader for your region. And you're going to be off and running with that. And it's an awesome, awesome way to take your business to the next level. It doesn't cost anything at this point. We're trying to get you guys on board with that, doing it on your own. We've done it before for other regions. It does work well. Sometimes we got to step in and really help, but it costs money to do that. So we were trying to help you guys out here. In any case, just food for thought. Keep that in mind. In the meantime, have a wonderful night, an awesome week, and God bless every one of you. Thank you. Good night.